Ever wonder how a breakthrough idea actually becomes reality? Hi, I'm Susan Lindner, and this is the Innovation Storytellers Show, where I sit down with the change makers behind the world's most inspiring innovations to learn how they did it and the stories that help them make it happen. If you've ever had a big idea or want to tell yours in a more powerfully connected way, you're in the right place. I promise you'll get new ideas for how to tell a better story to your audiences too. So let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of Innovation Storytellers, where we not only talk about the most important innovations of the day, but we talk about the stories that help innovators get their big idea across the finish line. Today's going to be a really interesting conversation. I hope you are ready to talk about risk and de-risking, especially when it comes to your ginormous AI projects that everyone has sitting on their desk. I just got back from 3 weeks in Europe, and AI is the only phrase I heard. It is literally swallowing us whole. So I'm so excited to have an expert on the line with me who can talk a little bit about AI strategy, de-risking some of our AI investments, and really thinking in new ways about how we introduce and tell the stories around the AI projects that we so desperately need to get in front of leaders and teams today. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Lukas N, who is the VP of Product Strategy and Innovation at SAP Signavio, which specializes, well, he in particular specializes in de-risking ambitious projects and driving transformation at the intersection of AI, business process management, and organizational change. Lukas focuses on integrating AI strategy into SAP's core operations, building high-performance teams, and fostering a culture of innovation. Lukas, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so let's start off at the beginning. Nobody walks in through the front door of innovation. So how did you get here?
Wow, there is like a 1 minute story and a 10-minute story. But I think the most important part is that it took me a while, in a sense, and I swear this will make sense. When I was in school, I felt like a lot of people had a fixed idea of what their careers would look like. I will become a doctor or a lawyer or whatnot. And at the time, when you're young, you feel like almost like it's a shortcoming if you cannot with confidence say like, I will pursue this endeavor or whatnot, right? And it took me a couple of years to realize that this is not necessarily a bad thing, meaning not knowing what is happening in the next 2 or 3 years and in what ways you want to engage can be a virtue. And so what I'm saying today is, with a little bit of hindsight, right, that the most interesting stuff that I personally want to engage with in 3 years from now are the things that don't exist today or I don't have any clue about. And realizing that it's okay to not know exactly where you want to go can be an advantage, but it shouldn't hold you back from defining what you want to seek out. And so because I wasn't able to say, this is exactly what I wish for, I turned it around and said like, hey, but I know what it would look like. Meaning it became clear I wanted to work in an environment where there are smart people, interesting problems, and there's a kind environment where there's not like a zero-sum game environment where it feels like you're building towards with other people. And this, I feel like in school, you learn a lot of things, but you don't really learn, for instance, wishing. Everybody is like focused on, I want this car, this house, whatever. And the reality is what we often want is more of a progression. And so it makes sense, or to me, it made sense to say like, this is what it should look like. And what it then really is, how would I know? But that's okay. And it took me a couple of years, but ultimately I found myself in this environment where we kind of try to will things into existence that materialized the wishes I had and where I felt that I could help in terms of my background and what I bring to the table. And I think that's also a big part that whatever we do in the end, we want to feel like we can contribute and be an important part of the journey.
So a lot of that is also saying, like, God, I don't want it to be like this, right? There's like a whole lot
Yeah.
of no thank yous. I think that's what your 20s are for, right? You got to figure out all the stuff that, like, okay, that didn't work for me, and move on and just keep until you get it right. So you start off in startup land too, right? I mean, the joys of working through startups is an endless lesson in innovation, failure, pick yourself up, try again, right? What was that startup experience like?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there because we have, I guess, what people would call a survivorship bias, right? We look at innovation, the people who succeed, and we turn it into a story of the pursuit of this one thing or the happiness or whatever it might be. When in reality, if you work through innovation and you end up, I'm not saying it's Stockholm syndrome, right? That you love your captor, but what essentially what you said is absolutely right, that you learn like failure modes, you learn what doesn't work, and but you're still pursuing it because you feel like this willing interesting things into existence is worth it. So I started out after university jumping into AI simply because it felt like this is the next biggest thing that needs to be willed into existence, right? And the angle we took back then was, and when I say AI, like back then, like 15 years ago, it was a very different AI, right? Not like these language models. It was like old school traditional data AI. We tried to semantically analyze documents because we had a feeling that there was already a big conversation about an avalanche of data and everybody drowning in data, how to turn that into insights. And that was the first thing that got me going and like working in really dynamic teams. And then actually I had multiple stints in startups all over the place, right? Hospitality, esports, betting, like multiple iterations of different ideas. The one thing that was always like the unifying was we don't know whether it will work out. It sounds risky. How can we do it? Like, how can we create the value proposition and create the product market fit? And I was drawn to the people with the passion and like the desire to create something. And that's where I felt like it materializes. Also, like when you're young, you're like, I want to be part of this rocket ship kind of experience. But after a couple of years, I, in a way, felt like I had seen a lot of those permutations of what startups can look like.
Hmm.
And I said, like, hey, I kind of want to see the other side of the coin. And I onboarded with a big international corporate and went and moved to the US. But as fate might have it, sometimes it has better plans for you. I ended up then doing again, like very startup focused and de-risking kind of activities, and that ultimately then became my thing as well at SAP.
Yeah. So, and you have this fantastic accent. Will you tell us where you're from?
Yeah. Oh, this nondescript Central European accent you're referring to? Yeah, but I will never get the lilt out of it. I'm Austrian, born and raised in Salzburg, which is tiny, but it's very picturesque. I always say that the Salzburg has some sort of beautiful delusion of grandeur because it thinks it's much bigger than it actually is, but it's a very pretty and a wonderful place to grow up.
Well, it's like Sound of Music country. Like, how can you
It
not
is.
love it? Right? I mean, I love my time there. But I also think it's a reminder for all of us that innovation is happening all over the world, obviously, and it doesn't really matter where you come from anymore, right? The opportunity to explore new ideas and pursue them is open to everyone these days.
I think you're pointing towards something super important because, especially now with the latest iteration of AI, what we see is that the cost for getting to the first step, the first increment where you can showcase whether you can create value or not, like whether you call it product market fit or product discovery or whatever, there's like multiple versions of framing it. Like the cost essentially collapsed and it's less of an arcane art. You don't have to like assemble a team of five different specialities. Like the way how far one person can go and at what little cost, I think what that will create is a more open and participatory innovation space. So I totally expect innovation coming from very, very unexpected places. Why? Because those are typically the ones that are overlooked when we try to say, like, what are the safe bets with innovation? It's an oxymoron, right? But that's how every company works. They're like, let's do the low-hanging fruit in terms of innovation first. And so I'm excited about the future where we see wilder and more crazy ideas from all over the world.
Yeah. So let's dive into some of these ideas that you've been working on and the innovations that you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you've been working at Signavio.
Oh, at Signavio, I would say the last couple of years, we really were working quite specifically with AI because it felt like all of a sudden we have this capability overhang. So what normally happened is you would have a long laundry list of ideas that you felt like, wow, we could create outsized value for our customers. We would love to do it. And all of a sudden we're in this reversal, right? That normally never happens. You have this, like, this technology falls into your lap and you don't even know exactly what it can do. So in a way, in the past, before, let's say, like the latest revolution AI, we would come up with ideas and in like some engineering minded folks would say like beautiful idea, but it won't work or it will just cost too much. So there was this inversion. And what we now have like mostly worked on is seeing like two things. First, how can we quickly showcase that we can use it and it makes sense? So early like efficiency plays and things where we help people to do their job better. I call that, by the way, the peacocking phase of AI. Everybody's out there. Look at my feathers. I too can do AI. I slap a chatbot interface or a prompt in any part of my product, and I can showcase to you that I can do AI, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong about it. And we are guilty of that as well. So we did certain things, like for instance, how can you quickly optimize something that was very tedious before and do it through a chat interface? To give you an example, I work in a space where you have to draw out and conceptualize like how a business process looks like, right? So you create a model of all the steps needed in a business process. And so to align, because for a big company, you want to know how, I don't know, procurement, invoicing, all these kind of things, how to work out. And you don't want it to be some like not understood, like implicit knowledge. You want it to be out there in the open, right? So you literally paint or you draw like the business model, and
You
that use
storyboard it almost.
exactly
Yeah.
100%. So what the storyboard is to the artist, the business process model notation is to the economist, right? Who works in a big, or the ops person in a company. It's a very good analogy. I will steal that. And it used to be tedious in the sense that you had to actually draw the entire thing. Now, one very quick and obvious win for our organization was to turn that process into something where you can start with the text that you already have. Either you interview a person or you take like a SOP, so standard operating procedure, or whatever you had, and just put the narratives, the stories in there, and let the AI give you like a first 80% approximation or 90% approximation, so it would change the flow, right? So doing quick things we knew could save and help people in terms of time and effort. Obvious thing. I think we all do that. Now, after let's say the peacocking phase, and it's not yet over. We're still innovating. We're doing the same thing for other artifacts and trying to make the ingestion and the processing of these artifacts faster. But now I feel like we have a second stage that we're working in, namely to not only go after small efficiencies, but also going after, and sorry, sometimes they're not even small, right? They can be big. But what I'm trying to get to
Oh,
is now the second stage is doing things that weren't possible before. And one of the examples, without maybe going into too much detail, is it's hard to translate what the business thinks to how IT operates, right? Or like in a way how your company is run. And there's
Wait, so can
often,
I just ask a
sure,
question?
please.
Is IT responsible for executing on AI at SAP, or does the business unit leader have to dedicate themselves to deployment as well?
That's a very good question. AI is mostly so it depends what kind of AI, right? When it's about enablement of the people who work at our company, obviously IT rolls stuff out and they are making sure that we can use it in a compliant and sensible way, right? But then deciding what kind of AI needs to be developed and in which part of the product it needs to live, and that's like a different conversation for different people. But specifically, what I wanted to allude to is that very often there is silos within a company. And one of those typical silos is the people who set up a system, how you work, right? Based on like the software you're using, whether it's an ERP or a CRM or whatever it might be. These, well, this silo is not directly communicating with the business. And so one of the first things that we invested in is how can we bridge that gap? Because that has been always very, very hard. But what we now did, for instance, with AI is said, like, let's start with business problems. We understand them, we feed them to the AI, and we can match the problems that businesses have with our expertise that is in a different language, lives in a different world, but can connect it and can guide you through this translation service. Why? Because obviously we all saw that translating from one domain to the other, whether it's a language, was very easy, or something else like from language to pictures. And so we kind of made the connection that if the people who should work together but don't speak the same language, maybe we can foster that connection. So we built a product called Transformation Advisor, where you start with business problems and it will literally tell you what are the first business processes that you should tackle and look at and like understand more deeply, because they represent what the business wants. And so I guess what I want to say ultimately, we're evolving from, let's say, the first quick bets on like how do we get more efficient and how can we do our stuff better, to now more differentiated ideas where we say like, what is unique, what can be done with this technology that wasn't possible before. And I think that's exciting. The next stage, we're not there yet, but the next stage will be like really making sure we can enable more people to participate, because I think that is the most pressing need going forward.
Yeah, which is scary for a lot of people, right? Because we're just hearing about we don't want to bring more people in, we want to lay more people off, right? So there's a lot of conversation around what is the balance between, do we keep our amazing people and train them to become really wizards of this new possibility, right? And everything that's available to them, or are we just here for the short-term productivity gains up front? So the narrative, right, about how we'll communicate about AI is so critical, especially as we're walking from peacock to exploration to execution across the entire enterprise. So tell us a little bit about how you're, making this bridge and doing the narrative work around talking about de-risking and incorporating AI. What's the
Yeah.
storytelling like at SAP?
Well, honestly, I cannot speak with authority to what it is at such a big company at large, because I also think if it's authentic, it comes in the voice and the shape of the person who presents the narrative. I can tell about how I try to create narratives, and in my own unique way, maybe that will help others. I think for me, there were a couple of lessons that I learned that were really important for me. The first one is when people are afraid or they have reservations, that's true. In a sense, nobody schemes and lies about what they're afraid of, right? So you need to, whatever the impediments or the barriers that are put up in the organization, you need to take them seriously, right? So whether it is when other part of the organization says, hey, this will create extra work, or you will get the glory and we are like stuck with the boring work, you have to overcome like all of these in an authentic and honest way, right? You cannot disregard them. The next thing I would say in terms of storytelling that was important to me is that there is a little bit this perception of, if you just make sure the value is there and you have amazing story, that's all it takes. And I think I ran into that when I saw in innovation projects that clearly hit wonderful ROI targets. They were shut down because it threatened the power structures, right? If you have an organization span of control of, let's say, 100 people, and then there's a technology coming along the way and everybody is like patting their back because it's so cool and we can like put 50 people out of their process and do something new, right? It's not just like the person is incentivized to say like, oh, we'll have like a better TCO, like total cost of ownership, it will cost us less. It also means, wow, this changes my organization, how we work. And if you don't address like all aspects, that is also not good enough. Meaning, whether innovation is not just about showing that you can create value or that people like it or that you hit an ROI target, the narrative needs to incorporate the incentive structures that you see. So what I, in a way, learned is the narratives I need to tell are not like chiseled in stone. Those are the 5 beats to the story you always have to hit. It's about having the empathy of understanding, like, what are the incentive structures? What will be the impediments? And in what way can I reframe those stories so in an honest way it makes sense to everybody? Because innovation in the end is always a team sport. You can go much faster with a small, smart team, but if you want to have impact, and that's the only currency, honestly, there is in the end, you have to bring a lot of people. And that is why I tell my people in my organization, if you learn nothing from me personally, that's okay. Just learn one thing: reframing. Meaning, it's very rare that in the world where we work and innovation, that we have a zero-sum game where you win, I lose, and vice versa. You want to create like some synergies where you bring everybody to the table and make sure that it can be not only perceived, but it can work out for everybody. And that is, I'm not sure if I'm being like too abstract, but this is what really helped me because it represents multiple failures that I saw with innovation projects. Because in the beginning, you're naive. You're like, oh, clearly we have a wonderful ROI or whatever. This will work out. And then you run against something you didn't experience before, whether it's incentive schemes, hierarchies, or like you peel the onions of the reality of people working together.
So, in a storytelling framework that I like to use with clients, the part that you're talking about is imagining a shared future with your audience that you're talking about your next project with. So for my listeners, consider, before you start talking about this fantastic new project and how amazing it's going to be and how life-changing it's going to be, ask your audience, imagine if we could accomplish the following tasks. We're not even talking about the project at the moment, or I mean, about the particular thing you're introducing. We're talking about the tasks that most impact the listener's life. Like, where's the agony in their life that this project might solve? The goal is to imagine a better place that we could get to. And your job as the innovator is to help people take the next right step. We're not asking them to figure out how to get to paradise just yet. We want them to co-imagine a future with us that has way more parameters than the AI projects that we're working on at the moment. But we need to stop for a moment and take into account the audience's desire for something greater. And then we can figure out where our AI or whatever innovation project that we're working on fits into their dream of a future reality. If we don't stop for a moment and ask about those empathetic pieces, like this giant problem, imagine if it was solved. Imagine if we could just get this much closer to our customers. Imagine if we could share information across silos in a way that we're not currently doing, and how much smarter, faster, more profitably we could get there. Let's talk about that for a moment. And I've just found when you allow your audience to co-create the future with you, they're going to be way more receptive to whatever project you're offering them if they have a hand in imagining for themselves what tomorrow can look like. And your project is a piece of that. It's not the totality. Because, like you said, stuff's going to change. And if you promise them that you can do all of these things, or that your one project is going to be the thing that saves them, you're going to have a real challenges 6, 8, 12 months down the road when the sand shift underneath them, because that's just the nature of innovation.
What I also really like about what you just said is it points the finger at something that very often gets overlooked. I think people who work in innovation have often like a tendency to say, and I'm being a little bit crass here, step aside, let the cool kids take over, right? And what's so fundamental about a good story is it's shared.
Right.
It's you never tell yourself a story. I mean, you do tell yourself a story, but those are not the good ones, right? You need to work with the audience. You need to connect. And so if you apply that and you're honest, and what I heard is really like it shows that you need to not take stuff away and say like, oh, I will solve a problem. It's about we are together creating better than we otherwise could by ourselves, right? And
Right.
this framework and how you like presented it like makes it easier to not fall into one of those failure modes that are so easy. And that's maybe like a little chip on my shoulder about all the innovation frameworks out there. In the beginning, you're like, oh, I love this framework and I only need to adhere to it and everything will be great. But there's this quote from, I think it's Wittgenstein, like a philosopher, right? And he said,
I'm familiar.
he said about well a certain like in terms of like philosophy, it's more like a ladder. You step up and then you can leave it behind. I feel like innovation frameworks, you should be familiar with them. You need to have like all of the pegs on the ladder so you can step up, but you need to understand what is right for your audience and how to tell the story and what are the failure modes that together the two of you need to avoid. So it's less about strict adherence to an orthodoxy and it's more about within the narrative co-creating like what will work out together and avoiding what creates pain.
So tell us where, in places, I know I don't necessarily get the story right the first time around, right? This is a lot of trial and error, just like any MVP or any pilot project. So where has story helped you, and where have you kind of maybe missed the mark with some of the storytelling that you've done in the past, Lukas?
Hmm. That's a very good question.
Learn from our each other's mistakes.
Yeah, I I would say it's what I have where I had challenges that I didn't foresee with storytelling was not understanding what story needed to be told, for instance. So first, maybe a couple of things. Most of the time with innovation, like it's the storytelling is for making sure the impact, the stakeholders, all these things are like taken care of and aligned, right? Where today I do most of my storytelling is in strategy. Because I think in strategy, it's the most important, or storytelling can help the most in trying to make the unfamiliar familiar and vice versa. What I mean by that is very often today, strategy is like some sort of a planning exercise. And if it goes into what we want to do, it's more like feature by feature comparison. What are the others doing? Oh, I need to do that so I don't look bad. If you think it through, that doesn't make sense because in the per definition, it would mean you end up completely undifferentiated because everybody would be the same. So storytelling helps me go against the natural instinct of how like we should progress and what we should do and find things that are not obvious, right? And how to evolve the the value proposition and where to go with our efforts. Now, if we go back to failure modes of like innovation projects, I remember that we had like one project where and that was before my time at Signavio, where we worked with a big insurance. And it was a CIO mandated project. So it was rather high stakes. And they were kind of thinking like, what should we do? And through exploration, we came to a point, and that was 10 years ago, where we said, wow, this like e-bike phenomenon is gaining more and more traction. You see more and more e-bikes, especially in Europe. For people not familiar with city centers in Europe, it's like you will see so many e-bikes, you wouldn't believe it, right?
Right.
And the idea was, hey, we don't have like any type of product, but clearly this cannot be like a regular insurance play, because the dynamics, the risk factors, everything is a little bit different. The bikes are very expensive. You have higher like speeds and so forth. And we kind of like did quote unquote the right thing, because we de-risked the product. We got into what data could help, and we went like the full de-risking exercise, but we hit the mark because we thought the story was about like creating like a new product. But what we missed to tell was it was a project where the CIO wanted to show it's not just about creating incremental value. It's putting the organization in a position where it can quickly take on new challenges. So we, in a way, did the right thing. We came out with something that was validated, that would have been very like commercially successful, but it didn't fulfill the needs of the innovation. And I think about that from time to time, because like often it's easy to believe that innovation is just, oh, we just make it commercially successful and everybody will be happy, when there can be many more layers. And so what you ultimately need to achieve with innovation is not just like de-risk it and make it commercially successful. You need to understand like what is the deeper story that this project needs to tell.
Yeah. What do you think people don't get about de-risking innovation? What do people miss? Like, how can you help
Hmm.
see around corners a little bit, Lucas, since this is really your day to day?
Yes, I think it's very easy to give you the perfect description of doing the risking. Namely, there is like one sentence and you don't need any more. It's systematically lowering the cost of failure. And then people go like, but wait, because it's almost like, and I want to give an analogy. I can explain in 1 minute how you can run a marathon, right? Like it's very easy to say what needs to be done. You need to exercise at least 5 times a week, CO2 max, and you need to run and progressively increase the distance you run each week or every other week. It's not perfect, and a lot of people will be now cross with me for various reasons, but it's in a way, it's easy to explain, but very hard to execute. With
Mm,
innovation, it's the same. Lowering the risk, sorry, systematically lowering the cost of failure sounds very easy, but doing it is very hard. And this is not a story, again, where you can just confide in, oh, I have this perfect framework. And if I just dance in the right way and conjure the spirits of magical innovation, everything will fall into place. I need to do the hard work. And that, for instance, means what are the risks that my company or my organization or the project will face? Because it's very, very easy to have some sort of myopic view on de-risking, right? There's this quip, with a hammer in the hand, the world is nails and not nails.
mm.
So you will always see the risks that you're most familiar with. And but that doesn't mean you're covering all of it. So there is no like easy solution. You have to, for each and every endeavor or de-risking idea, you have to go through the full playbook and say, like, is it desirability, feasibility, viability? What are the things that could get me? And then what we talked about before, you have to not just be like this group that does magical things in some ivory tower. You need to engage and see yourself as somebody that supports the organization. I think if I have to boil it down into maybe the one thing that most often goes wrong, is that people in an innovation space don't see themselves as supporting everybody else. The idea should be, you are the champions of innovation. You are like the rest of the organization. We are here to support. You would want to do that. Like, what is it that the story you would want to tell through a product that you can't because you don't have the resources or the time or whatnot, right? So let us help you to to create that story and that innovation. If you come from that perspective and don't try to apply frameworks, I think you're already in the 90th percentile out there.
Yeah, because you forget why we're doing this. And I find most innovators fall in love with the tech.
Exactly.
It's not even a falling in love with the ROI or the outcomes necessarily. They're so excited about the thing they built. And I constantly need to remind people that Star Wars was about Luke. It wasn't about the lightsaber, even though it's the coolest weapon ever invented in the history of Hollywood. In my mind,
Agreed.
it's not the lightsaber story. It's the story of how we save each other. Yeah.
Yes. And I think you're spot on with your analysis. I would even say that what you like will also shape what you see in the world. If you like tech, you're more prone seeing functionality. And I would say the biggest missed opportunity from a business perspective right now in terms of innovation is not like how quickly can you execute on like any one AI opportunity, but figuring out what game you want to play in the future. Because with this technology, the shape of companies will change. That sounds a bit abstract, but what I'm trying to say is an innovation like that's really big, just like AI is, does not just mean we will have different like functionalities and new buttons to press. It will also reshape what companies do for their customers. And that is also part of the innovation space, not just like how quickly can I get like an AI to do something for me. It's also to what extent can I capture the value chain and serve customers that maybe is unique or differentiated.
Because that's really the long-term value, right? That's
Absolutely.
the long game. Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, it's time for me to put you on the hot seat, Lukas. So I'm going to ask you the 3 questions I ask every guest on the show. The first is, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
Wow. I'm woefully underprepared for that question.
That's why it's called a hot seat.
What I would say, just because we had a conversation about narratives and stories, I really go with the idea that the best innovation and the best thing is stories itself. Because no matter what you can achieve, the one thing that makes it a bit unique to humanity is that we can tell stories that unite people in working together and collaborating not with boundary of like 150 people intimately, but pursuing bigger goals and working 1,000, 10,000 people. It essentially just says how far you can go to the moon, to Mars, wherever you want to go, means like how many people can you get into collaborating with each other. And so stories as an innovation, I'm pretty sure must be our biggest success.
And you are the first person to ever say that out of 220 plus episodes. So if you could join any innovation team in the course of human history, which innovation team would you like to have been on?
Ooh. Oh, there are so many. Can I get like 10? No, I will go with one, but there are so many teams and so many personalities I would have loved to get to know personally. I think for very personal reasons, I would have wanted to work with the original founders of Pixar, right? Even before it was acquired by Steve Jobs. They created a rendering algorithm called RAISE, like Point Reyes in California, but it's actually an acronym for renders everything you ever saw. And why? And it sounds strange, but we think of innovation predominantly through value generation, what it can do, right? ROI and all that stuff. And I had the good fortune of working at Weta Digital, like one of the companies who create special effects for movies, right? And to me, it was such a wonderful experience being in the room and not just talking about does it make sense for the business, but having a conversation about is it beautiful? Is it flourishing? Will it be a story that people will love? And I don't want innovation to be the sole proprietary object of market economics and businesses. I feel like as we progress, I would hope that the future has more abundance in a way that we can think about innovation more of a like, what beautiful ideas and things can we create and not like how much money can we make, if that makes sense.
Of course, of course. And my last question is, what is the innovation that the world needs now?
Ooh, that will get a little bit, I don't want to say dark, but again, I'm very occupied by or with AI because it's a very, very dominating force right now in innovation. And I would say, no matter where you apply yourself, there's so many things you can do, all good and fine. But the one thing that is woefully underestimated is that we never had a technology that can create rapport and meaningful emotional connections between humans and non-human entities at the marginal cost of electricity. And so I think we fall easily into, will it make money or will it like kill everybody on earth? Like those are like all thoughts that the zeitgeist has already absorbed, whether it's Terminator or any of the dystopian utopian ideas. But kind of like thinking through, like, if we now really reach into our emotions and can do that like very reliably at very like little cost, what do we want to create? And one thing that I would advocate for, if the incentives out there are for attention, and attention be supercharged by division and like extremes, because that's like the easiest attention mechanism to get. And then having a technology that is so personal and you will confide in and will be your like your intimate like technological partner in a sense. That's dangerous. So I would really hope that we rethink our incentive structures and kind of take this opportunity not lightly, because I love this saying. I'm not sure exactly who coined it first, but we have the empathy of cavemen, the institutions of the Middle Ages, and the technologies of gods. And I would just hope that instead of like forsaking the future, we just rally to the cause and try to get good at being gods, right?
Right. Or go revitalize our empathy genes that are inherent in the operating system we were born with. And we need to
100%.
reactivate them in order to manage fire, right? In order to manage the technology of the gods. Yeah.
100%.
Lukas, this has been a fantastic conversation, and shout out to our friend Peter Temis at ILO and our friends at Samudra, who originally brought us together oh so many years ago. Lukas, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So very simply, either on LinkedIn, they can find me, or also they can write me an email, lucas.egger@sap.com. Or we also have a thought leadership piece, like a podcast called Process Transformers, where we try to get different perspectives of how this change through AI technology will like pop up in interesting and novel ways in businesses, right? Where we have a space where we can talk like, hey, wait, our product needs to have like an emotional component. Yeah, that will be a part of the future. So let's think about it and talk to people who can help make a sense. So I think that will be the easiest, either like listening to the podcast, getting in touch with me directly, or just connecting via LinkedIn. I'm always very happy to connect to people who want to explore that space, because again, I think the biggest, most important thing right now is sense making, new stories, not just pursuing the features that others are building.
I could not have said it better myself. Lukas, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I truly hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that could inspire your own. And if you want to learn more about me or how I can help you and your team to become master storytellers to get your big idea to its finish line, head over to innovationstorytellers.com and schedule a call with me.